Today we're going up north of here, almost to the Oklahoma border, to Anna, Texas, to a place that is several hundred acres that they do a variety of things. They have a big horse stable where they keep horses for folks. It's a training facility. They also have cows in one pasture and horses in another, and another ones are hay fields that they mow hay every year to feed the livestock through the winter. I got a call that they had a big pecan tree that they wanted to take down, so I'm headed up there to take it down today. Whoops. Now that I've got up there, I have found that our pecan tree has turned into a Chinkapin oak that's half dead, leaning over the fence one way and trying to fall down a ditch another way. And there's pipe fence there that don't want to be crushed. So the tree has to be, if it's going to fall one way, we're going to have to pull it back the other way and make it fall. And this tree is right around 30 inches diameter, so it's not a small tree. And being oak, it's very heavy wood. I'll show you how we're doing this. And they showed me this supposedly pecan tree. Well, it turned out to be a Chinkapin oak, about 30 inches diameter. It was dead. Over half of it was dead branches all over it with a few living limbs. But what I found out as I started to cut it, it had been portions of it so dead for so long that green wood's fairly easy to cut with a chainsaw, but you take an old dead tree, especially oak trees, in the first year they're dead, they will get hard. And this tree was exceptionally hard. There was signs on the tree that maybe it had got lightning struck somewhere along the way, which also case hardens the tree and the wood. It often will kill a tree, but it'll also make it so hard that the wood's so hard it's very difficult to cut. So I had a half-dead tree that was leaning over a fence that had been lightning struck, and I'm wading around in deeper than knee-deep poison oak, poison ivy, briars, and undergrowth. So you'll see in the video where I have to just mow some of this down so that I got room to walk safely. One of the things you never want to do is cut a tree and not have an escape path, because you just don't know what's going to happen sometimes. So I spent a lot of time with a chainsaw just cutting undergrowth and briars and poison oak and getting them out of the way, so I had a safe escape path for myself. But here was the situation that took so much time with this tree. There's this fence along here and this ditch run through it, and they had put this welded pipe fence right here. The rest of this was barbed wire, but it was less than 2 feet from the tree. Here's our problem tree. The tree is not only leaning over the fence, it's trying to lean at about a 45 down the fence at the same time, and it's going to take out this welded steel fence there if it fell. So what I have to do, and this is where a lot of times I use those big winches on my trailer, is I have to pull the tree back this way, which is not the way it wants to fall. So I start hooking up cables. These are about 12 feet off the ground. Because this was a surprise, I usually take a ladder to do that. I didn't this day because it wasn't supposed to be this situation. So I have a rope with a weight on it, and I threw it up through the limbs and pulled 2 cables up in there. One of them I hooked straight from the trailer to it. Notice where I positioned the trailer. That was for a reason. My truck weighs about 4,500 pounds, and the trailer, with all the additions I've put on it over the years, weighs about 4,500 pounds. Well, that's about 9,000 pounds. A 30-inch oak tree is about 20,000 pounds. So if this tree started to lean, it literally would drag my trailer and truck backwards, even if the 12,000 pound winch held it. So I backed it up against this 2-foot diameter pecan tree. So now it cannot drag the trailer and the truck any farther backward because it's chocked against that tree. So I got one cable bringing it back straight toward the truck. The problem is it's leaning away too. So there happened to be a big 4-foot diameter red oak tree there very close by. I took my biggest winch, which is a 17,000 pound winch, and run through a snatch block, strap around the tree and another snatch block here, and then 12 feet up in the tree where I got a cable. So now I've got 2 cables and I got a 12,000 pound and a 17,000 pound winch on this tree. So I have to clear out all this underbrush that's in here that was a real problem about being able to walk around there. And then I set up a camera out here for y'all to see, and then I had one on my helmet, but that showed you a little bit of what was going on. But I had to slowly start cutting the tree from the back side because I want it to fall this way. First you cut a notch on this side, then you cut it from the back side. And as I'd pull, but because another problem is I didn't know we were getting in this situation, so I went by myself up there. Quite often when I anticipate these situations, I have a lot of friends that they like to go cut trees, so I'll holler at them and they'll go along, and they'll be my winch people. So they'll stand up at the trailer and keep the winches tight. You'll notice in the video I had to cut the tree a little bit, stop, walk up to the trailer, tighten the winches, go back and cut the tree some more, and then come back and tighten the winches again. I think I made about 3 trips back and forth just doing that. And this is the issue when you're by yourself. I have remotes, but they don't work with this distance. I'm from the end of this winch here to there is 125 feet or so. It's farther than my remotes will reach, and it only works on one winch anyway. So I began tightening them cables, and cutting the tree at the same time, go tighten the cables and cutting the trees. So after a while, you see it went down. Now the thing that was, after all of that work with the cabling and stuff, to show you how much this tree just wasn't going to play with us right, when the tree fell, it literally fell right here. Even though I'm pulling with 2 winches that way, it didn't fall across the fence, but it also didn't fall where I wanted it to. But didn't hurt. We're out in a horse pasture, so it didn't matter. But this just starts to show you that with trees, especially in a leaning position, they can do some strange things. One of the things I found when I got down in the tree is it had a fence nailed to it over the years. You can see the rust stains from the deteriorating, rusting metal from probably nails or staples nailed in a fence years ago. And it was inside the tree, so you knew it was years ago because it wasn't on the outside bark. It was down in the tree. Also, the core had started to rot on this tree. So it was a little punky, but it still was stable. But anyway, we got this down. But I'm going to show you now in this video how we done it. But here's what we were dealing with. We got 2 cables on this. I've got to pull it sideways and this way at the same time to keep them falling over that fence. So we'll see what happens here. One of the ongoing problems with this job was the constant wading through this tall undergrowth, anywhere from knee high to waist high, some of it head high, covered with briars, poison oak, poison ivy, a lot of volunteer trees and scrub brush, constantly trying to trip over this stuff as it tangles your boots up. I spent a lot of time with just a chainsaw trying to cut some of this down to where I had access to everything and a safe exit to this place in case something went wrong. It took a lot of extra work just to clear the undergrowth from here. Remember I said we had a lot of trouble with the hardness of this tree. This is an example of it right here. Is as long as I was cutting straight across the grain, the saw was cutting slowly, but alright. As soon as I started cutting with the grain and cutting this wedge out, the wood is so hard it started deflecting the chainsaw blade, causing it to make a curved cut as it tried to reject it out the cut. So repeatedly I had to keep cutting this wedge out of this tree until I finally got it like I needed it to fell this tree safely. But the dang tree was so hard, it was literally making my saw blade cut a curve as I went with the grain. We're going to start cutting on the back side of this tree now. As you can see, the wood is so hard, it's hard for the chainsaw to get started right. You'll notice one of the first things I did here is, as soon as I had room enough, I put wedges in the back of this tree. I learned a really hard lesson a few years ago. I was cutting a very tall tree next to a 15,000 volt high voltage line, and I had hooked cables on it to pull it away from that high voltage line, and was pulling a lot of pressure to make that tree, because it was leaning toward the line. I wanted to go away from it. So I had a lot of pressure on my winch, and I started cutting, and just by luck I reached down and got a wedge and put in that tree, and about the time I got it tapped in there, the choker on that cable broke. So my cable released, the tree popped backwards. Probably the only thing that kept that tree from popping backwards and breaking off and landing in that 15,000 volt electrical line was that wedge that kept it from coming back too far. It shook a bunch, and I heard a lot of cracking, but it didn't break off my pivot point, so it stayed there. Since then, I have made some adjustments to my chokers. I've upsized them all to 7/16 cable, which is a lot more strength to them, so that I don't have that issue. And since then, I have never broke a choker, but the wedges, putting the wedges in there as early as you can is just a good safety measure. So think about that, especially if you're working with a leaner like this. One of the other things I'm doing here is the tree is leaning away from me and to my right. So I'm putting multiple wedges in, especially on the side that is away from me, because it's going to try to settle that way as I continue to cut into this tree. So I need some support over there and a lot of wedges. Kind of one of the rules is you just can't have too many wedges in the tree, especially a leaner like this. One of the things you can do, the wedges don't really want to go, so just keep doing this. Walk your hammer up and down your wedge roll, and it'll slowly ease them in there and get that thing really tight. The reason I keep walking around the tree is I want to see that I'm cutting this cut square. I got the front pointed square to my trailer, and I'm making sure my saw, as I cut, that I'm cutting a square cut, and this will make sure the tree falls the way I want it to. So every once in a while you'll see me peek around the tree to see how far I'm cutting. I don't want to cut too much on one side and not the other. One thing you got to remember about cutting these trees is don't get in a hurry. Take your time to check your wedges. Take your time to cut and check your cut to make sure you're still parallel. Step back and look at the tree. Are you moving it yet? Or is there anything that's looked like it might potentially go wrong? You can get yourself hurt so quick with these big trees, and especially with rotten limbs in them and all. And here I'm going back to tighten the winch cables again on the thing. And then I'll go back and cut some more, and then I'll come back and check these winch cables again. Each time I'm pulling them down farther to make sure that tree is not going the opposite way we want it to go. So take your time. It's well worth it to be safe on the job. Just take your time and evaluate where you're at all the time. As you can see here now, with the pulling of the cables, how we've opened up the gap in the tree. So I'm double wedging it. That's why I always buy the long wedges. Short wedges won't help you here. But double up those wedges, and that, again, I've got the tree chocked with these wedges. Keep adding wedges as needed, but double them when you need to. That gets you twice as thick gap. Now the tree's stable again. I can go back to cut. One of the things you'll notice here is I'm leaving this hinge of this tree extra wide. Remember, the tree wants to fall to the east and the south, but I want it to go to the north. So the tree is unknown factor since it's partially dead. It may be rotten in there. So I'm leaving about a 6-inch hinge on this tree just so that it'll hold it up and I got some control over it. I will use the winches then to progressively break that 6 inches of wood off rather than try to cut it with a chainsaw, which may allow the tree to lose control and go back down the fence. As you can see, as I pull the winches here, how it's doing what I want it to do. It's bending that 6 inches of wood on the hinge, but yet holding the tree upright to where it can't fall away from us there from this view. As you listen to these winches pull, understand that these are driven by two 800-amp 12-volt batteries. Even that these winches under this high load that we're pulling on I can only run one winch at a time with those batteries. So I'm having to run one winch, pull slack out of it, then run the other winch and pull more slack out of it. But I don't have enough amperage available to run both winches at the same time.
Cut through something that looked like nails. You see that? That looks like nails. This is an oak tree, a Chinkapin oak. And that black stripe means at some point there was a fence nailed to it probably. That's steel stain.
These are the cables that I was using to pull the tree over. Notice that the cables are joined with a clevis. It's much safer because the limb may break or something and get some slack in your cable, that you never want to use hooks where you just run cable around the tree and hook it back to itself. With slack, that hook can come undone and your tree will fall away from you. You lose control over it. With a Clevis, you never have to worry about that. So always join your cables with a positive attachment that cannot come undone.
Time to roll over on me.
Since the log's trying to roll over on us on the right, we're going to stop there and go to the other side and get some of the limbs trimmed off of it. I can't over-express how important it is to have situational awareness around. If I had been cutting a thing and hadn't noticed that that log was trying to roll over on me and I'd cut one more limb there, I could have ended up with this whole tree down on top of me. You just got to stay aware while you're doing all this work. Just situational awareness. What's going on around you? And keep yourself safe. Normally I'll cut these logs 20-21 foot long for two reasons. One is that's how long my trailer's a 20-foot trailer. Two, it's easier to load one 20-foot long log than two 10-foot. It just takes more time to load short logs. So I'll load this as one big long log, take it home, and we drop it off at the log yard. If I want something shorter, I'll cut it in half maybe and make 10-foot boards out of it. But it's just easier to transport one 20-foot log than a bunch of little ones.
This tree's giving me a problem. It's trying to roll over this way on top of me, and it's standing on two limbs, and then it's got a support limb. If I cut the support limb, it's going to lay over on top of me, and the two limbs underneath I can't cut, or they'll pinch my saw by squashing down on it. So I'm going to take time to rig my winches on my trailer and roll this thing 90 degrees. That'll bring both limbs, all of our problem limbs, up where I can get to them and there's no stress on them. So we should be able to cut them off with no problem then. All right, we're gonna try to roll that log over so we get off them limbs so I can cut it better.
Now, by rolling the log over, I can get to the three big limbs that was causing the problems. So they're totally exposed to me, and the log is chopped with a cable, so it can't roll back on me. It's time to trim those big limbs off and get them off so we can get this log loaded. What we're doing here is we're spinning the log around so that when I back the trailer up, it will be in line with the trailer bed. Right here, my 17,000 pound winch started stalling out. The log was just too heavy. So I stopped and doubled the cable on it with a snatch block and then proceeded to pull again. By then also my batteries had rested a little bit and we were successful. You see it went right on up in there then. We have to make a lot of adjustments sometimes, depending on the conditions.
Sometimes it takes just a lot of rigging to get this stuff loaded. I've got to pull it over, otherwise it's going to hang up on the back corner of the trailer.
doing all of this so that it didn't get hung on the back of the trailer there. I'm trying to swing the log around. Notice that I'm having to only run one winch at a time again. These things run such heavy loads, the batters will only support one winch at a time. So I jockey from one winch to the other as we move this up onto the trailer. When I measured it, I think it's even a little wider there. That's a 17,500 pound winch there. And it won't hardly pull it up here on this trailer, and that's a steel bed, so it's slick. I doubled the cable and still it was having trouble pulling up there. So how much do you think that log weighs when a 17,000 pound winch won't hardly pull it up here? It's a heavy dude, that's for sure. One of the reasons that I have my 3 winches mounted up on top of a big tall I-beam is these tall logs, as they start to come up on the trailer, gets taller than the winches. So you have to elevate your winches up to keep them getting in the way of the log. What I'm doing here is I always stop the log about right where it's at because the chokers start to get in the winches. So then I just throw a loop around either the end of the log or a knot like I did here, and that helps me pull the log on all the way up. I can disregard the choker that I was using earlier. You can see it hanging loose on the log. That cable will hold my ramp on here so I won't lose it. This cable will keep it from rolling. That cable is going to keep tension on it, so there's not much it can do to get away from me on the way home. I kept positioning. Notice how I scooted it over? That was to get this very heavy log in the middle of the trailer. I didn't want it on one side or the other. It'll overload the wheels. Using some heavy-duty timber saws, a trailer that has been heavily modified for logging, which includes 3 big winches to pull logs on and position them, and a lot of cabling and rigging. This is how I go out and I'm able to log by myself. What you see here is 2 batteries that normally drive my winch. But when I start running the battery down, I carry 3rd battery with me. So I hook it up, and so I literally have 3 batteries driving these winches there. They pull so much amperage, you have to do something to keep them winches turning on heavy logs like this. As we were finalizing this video, I had my wife look at it. And when she got through, she asked a question. One of the problems is I do this all the time, so I take things for granted. She looked at it and she says, "What's a choker?" Well, I guess if you're not around logging, you probably don't know what a choker is. Let me show you. There's more than one of them, so different ways you can use a choker. If you're an old farmer, the most common way is you take a chain, you run it around your log, and simply hook it back to itself. And that's what an old farmer would do if he needed to drag something out, and that would be a chain choker. So, depending on who you're at, where you're at, chokers mean different things to different people. Another choker, get you some cable clamps, loop you some cable, run it back through itself, and there you've got you a choker. You just pull on it and it chokes down. But a choker's basically, it draws down tight as you drag the log. So that's the basic description of it. But there's one way of doing it. Now, these are normally the chokers that I use to put up my trees to pull logs down. The tape on it is significant. I've learned over time, I've got a whole box full of these, and they're 15 feet long, 25 feet long, and 40 feet long. So I color code them with tape so that I just looking at my box, I know how long they are. Just saves a lot of time. On my trailer, I drag these logs up there with hooks. The problem is that's an old hook, and that's what it should look like with this flapper on there to keep the cable or the chain or the choker, whatever you got hooked to it, from falling out. But you don't want to drag this on the ground, and you certainly don't want to throw it around the log and tighten it, because it always ends up on the bottom of the ground and it just tears that off, and pretty soon you're looking at a hook that looks like this. So you want to avoid that, so that's why we hook a choker around the log, then hook this cable out here away from it on the thing. Now there's a couple of other variances on the chain choker. One, you can take a round hook. Here's your typical chain hook. There's your typical chain hook, and then here's a round hook. What the round hook does is you can hook here and it slides down and tightens the choker for you. That's one method of going at it. Here's a professional choker that a big rigging company, especially crane operators and stuff, would use, where it has been, I don't know what you call that. Anyway, it's got a big lag thing on it that holds it all together, and you would rig the log and run this back through itself and hook your choker. Now, this log is too big for this choker. I have short chokers, I have longer chokers, so I would go get a longer one for this log, and then I'd be able just to pull it up on my trailer, and this would be tightening up. So that's a professional choker. This is a typical logger's choker, and it's different. But basically how it operates, it's got this little piece, and you run that around the log, slide that in and turn it, and now you got it locked, yet this can tighten down. So if you put this around the log, like that, then when you pull on this, it tightens it all up. So another way of using a choker and a different kind of choker. Now, one problem with this open end hook is it can just slide off. This is a logger's choker or hook, and it's designed to hook on that chain and then slide through like that. But because it's got these little tangs on it, it don't tend to fall off, so it's fairly easy to hook a log, and then you always want that turned around against your hook, and then it slides down. Slide down and choke up, then you can just pull with that. So if you still like chains, that's another option, is get you some logger hooks and put on the end of your chain. Now, one, you notice that I was using gloves for all this. You always, when you're dealing with cable, you want to use gloves, because as you use cable, it frays, and there'll be little wires sticking out of it you can't even see. And that blood on my arm, that's because I had gloves on, and it was laying up here, and I reached past it, and it got me. That little old burr right there, it got me. Stabbed right in my arm. But all your cable, after a while, wears. Will usually have a few of those. If they get too bad, you want to replace them, but that keeps you safe. One thing about gloves, I don't use rawhide gloves. I learned years ago that here in Texas it gets so hot in the summer and I sweat in them. And if you get them wet, the next day you start to put them on, they're just hard. You can't hardly get any flexibility out of them. These are goat skin, and it stays flexible no matter how wet it gets the day before. So they're good. What you do not want to use is these little old cloth gloves that you might find at one of the box stores that they call gloves. Those things will not help you with this cable. It'll stick right through that, so not a good thing. You might have noticed that my chains are orange. My Clevises are orange. It don't matter what color, as long as it's bright. I started having a problem because these things would get rusty after I used them a while. And at a logging job, they would get knocked on the ground or laid on the ground temporarily in the leaves and all, and they just kind of disappear. I was losing equipment. So I took it on myself just to start painting everything a very bright color. And what that does is, there's not any leaves in the forest this color. So any color you want to paint, as long as it's bright, paint some of your equipment and that'll keep you from losing it. A while ago I was talking about running this back to yourself. Well, as I pointed out in the video, when I got these up my tree, I really don't want them popping or something and coming unhooked in some way. Now if you run it back through yourself, that's fine, but it takes a long time sometimes to run that cable through. What works better is I use these Clevises, and they can slide up and down just like a choker, but they cannot come off your cable, and it's faster than trying to go get that 25-foot piece of cable and run back through here. So one of those things I do that just makes things simpler when I'm out doing things. And now you have a full education on chokers, the different kinds. You only need to use a cable big enough to do your job. Around a construction job, sometimes you'll see 3/4 inch, 1.25 inch cables, depending on what they're lifting. I'm not lifting that much. A 1/2 inch cable is kind of overdoing it for me. I use a lot of 7/16 cable. But the littler the cable, the more flexible it is for me. Yeah, 3/4 inch would be never break on me, but I couldn't bend it or handle it. So that's why we stick with smaller cable, just enough to do the job. So now you're an expert on chokers. Don't know what else I can teach you about that, but when next time you go to grab a log, you'll know what your choices are. Well, here it is. We've got it home, we got it unloaded. It's waiting for us to get it over to the sawmill. Quite a battle with this one tree. Later on, I look forward to putting this on the sawmill and cutting it up, because I've never cut a Chinkapin oak up. It's from the white oak family, and it's kind of rare around here in Texas. It just grows in one spot up kind of north of here. So I'm kind of interested in cutting it up and see what I can make out of it and how the lumber behaves. Probably even cut a bowl blank out of it. So that's it for this video. If you liked it, push the like button down at the bottom. Subscribe, help us out. Stay tuned for the next one. The next one, we're going out and cut up a bunch of hackberry trees that a landowner's building a house next to an old fence row that these huge hackberry trees grew. And he had a guy with a bobcat and a root grubber dig these up and push them over with that bobcat. So these are all laying on the ground. I just got to cut them up and load them on the trailer. But some of them are huge. Now, a lot of people don't think much of hackberry. It's not the greatest lumber in the world, but for a wood turner, it's kind of a valuable commodity because it's a close-grained white wood and it kind of sought after. So we'll probably end up cutting a bunch of those into slabs later on and then turning blanks. But for right now, the next video will be about us going out, cutting all these big trees loose and loading them on the trailer. Took 2 loads just to carry them all off. So that'll be what you'll see next. Look forward to seeing you again.